The Switch 2 is just around the corner, and a ton of leaks has been floating around throughout the past couple months. And today, I am going to outline those and see just about everything we know at this point about the Switch 2. So, let's get started. We are now in the month of January, and for that, we are just around the corner of when Nintendo is supposed to reveal the Switch 2. Now, they have said it would be revealed sometime before the end of March, so we are cutting it pretty close here. Still, with all the leaks we have been getting out recently, most, if not all of which, has been all but confirmed, then yeah, I think it's time for Nintendo to just reveal the system already, because at this point, nothing they reveal is even going to be a bit of a surprise anymore, since we basically would already know much of what the system is. But nonetheless, I am going to outline just about everything that has been leaked out recently. Now, of course, this is going based on the time that this video was filmed, and we could very well see some other big bombs drop right afterwards, because it feels like just about every day, the leaks start coming, and they don't stop going, and they don't stop going, and they don't stop going. I'm also going to talk about how this is going to align with a few videos that I published recently, as I also did a video outlining the best case scenario for the Switch 2, and the worst case scenario. So for those of you who want to check those videos out, I'll have it linked in this video. But for now, let's go right into the news and leaks. So I'll start with the one that has been officially confirmed by Nintendo themselves. This was something they mentioned in their investors meeting back in November, and that is the fact that the Switch 2 is actually going to be backwards compatible. That is good news. And that is something that I've been hoping for, and I even put that in the best case scenario video. So, if you're somebody who owns an original Switch, or maybe you did have one, but your old Switch has been wearing down, and you want to replace it, or just whatever reason you may have, well, Switch 2 is going to be able to run your old Switch games. So, that part I am glad to hear. One thing that still remains unclear about the Switch's backwards compatibility at this point in time is whether or not the original Switch games will receive some sort of performance boost on the Switch 2. That is something that I have been personally hoping for, probably more than the fact that the Switch 2 is backwards compatible. And I also think this could help drive Switch 2 sales at launch more so than just basic backwards compatibility, because if the Switch 2 only just merely runs Switch 1 games, and just the exact same way it does on the base hardware, same locked resolution, same locked frame rate and everything, then I don't exactly think that's going to drive Switch owners to the Switch 2, at least not at launch, especially if there isn't a ton of games that is available at launch. But if the Switch 2 actually does have more of a performance boost, and it runs Switch 1 games at higher resolutions and frame rates, then that is something that could entice people and incentivize people to get the Switch 2, even if the launch lineup is very slim. Like, with me personally, there have been games that I've been holding off on completing before the Switch 2 actually comes out. Like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is an example of that. It might even also incentivize me to try out some games that I may not have played on the base Switch hardware, but to play them on the Switch 2. Like Metroid Dread is an example of a game that could potentially run really good on the Switch 2. Also, I could imagine games like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, which is locked at 30 frames per second, actually running at a full 60 frames, and possibly at higher resolutions than 1080p. Maybe not 4K, but a sub 4K experience of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door could potentially be a great experience in the Switch 2 if there is a performance boost. So now to go into some of the leaks on the system itself. And oh boy, this is where things really start to get interesting. And, I will start with the design of the system. This is the Switch 1, of course. And basically it pretty much looks like a Switch. The system is going to have a bigger screen that is 8 inches. And in comparison to that, the original Switch screen, which I have right here, is 6.2 inches, while the OLED model is 7 inches. But the interesting part is the joycons. Instead of sliding those on, like what you see with the ramps of the joycons, these are going to be magnetic, and they just attach to the system. Now, of course, you still have the latch buttons on the back of the joycons to detach them from the system, but overall, it looks like an improvement over the rail system. Now, as far as the buttons on the joycons themselves go, they're mostly the same layout, but the buttons appear to be bigger on the Switch 2, which hopefully is good in terms of comfortability. However, the biggest notable thing is that now the Switch 2 Joy-Cons is going to have a C button on it. This is practically confirmed to be real, as this has been consistent with other leaks that has been coming out with the system as of late, such as the Genki one that was leaked during CES. But what is this C button for? Well, right now we don't have any information as to what exactly this is. Some are saying that the C button stands for cast, as it is rumored that the Switch 2 is going to have a wireless dock, and, well, that's what the C button stands for. Now, I'm not sure if I believe that part, as the actual Switch 2 dock has already been leaked, and from what I've seen of it, it looks pretty damn good. Like, I do like the curved design in comparison to the original Switch 2 dock here. There's also some that are saying that the C button is a communications button, so like something used to share your gameplay, photos, and other clips. And that would be something that would connect to a more recent Switch 2 leak involving a TikTok-style video sharing service called Vidmeo, which is a more fairly recent leak, but that one has very little verification on it and is really has more questionable stuff in it that kind of leans towards it being a fake, but don't know if I'm gonna do a full section on that. Really, that C button could be just about anything. So I think we're just gonna have to wait until we hear more about the system before we can really determine just what exactly that C button is. But now, for the sides of the Joy-Cons, which has leaked just recently. On top of the magnetic attachment at the end, this has much bigger SL and SR buttons, which is good if you ever wanted to use those, as the SL and SR buttons on the original Joy-Cons are tiny. Now personally, I never had that much of a use for those, but if you ever wanted to use those for any reason at all, then you will now be given bigger buttons for those. Now, ironically for me, the most use I may have had for these buttons was not so much on the Joy-Cons, but rather the SL and SR buttons on the NSO NES controller. Which is another thing I'd like to mention is, could we please get a Switch 2 version of that controller? Because I would like that, as I really do not dig the Joy-Con railing that they added on the NSO version of the NES controller. But the thing that is most interesting to me about the Joy-Con leaks would have to be the sensor that is around the middle, as it appears to be an optical sensor that is used as the bottom of a computer mouse. Now, I think GameXplain was the first to have pointed this out, and if what I'm about to tell you about it is true, then this is actually a very smart move. But it's been speculated that the optical sensor on the Joy-Con makes it so that the Joy-Con can be used as a mouse. Yes, an actual computer mouse that you use for your PC. And I'm hoping that this is true because I love this idea. Basically, because you would have what's basically a hybrid of a controller and a mouse. And really, using the Joy-Con right now in this scenario, I could actually see these buttons functioning on top, really functioning as the left and right mouse buttons. Picturing that right now. And if this is what the optical sensor is for, then man, that would be such a game changer. Now, I'm not a mouse and keyboard guy personally, but I know that there's some who prefer that, especially when playing first-person shooters. So I could imagine this being a function for, say, for instance, you're playing Metroid Prime, and using the mouse as the aiming functions for Samus. It would also be interesting to see how games like Fortnite and Call of Duty are received with these type of mouse controls. And I know that the Switch 2 has not gotten an actual Call of Duty game, but well, if the specs are anything to go by, and that's something I'll get to a bit later in this video, then it's possible that this could change with the Switch 2. Other basic functions that I can see the Joy-Con mouse being used for is for replacing much of the Wii-style pointer controls. That would be something that you might see in a game like World of Goo, as that thrived off of pointer controls. And I could also see the mouse being used for the Switch 2 OS in a manner similar to the Wii, where that had the Wii pointer controls in the Wii menu itself. I could also see the Switch 2 even having a similar type of icon for its OS. And also, I think this type of function would even be great if Nintendo made Super Mario Maker 3, because that is, after all, a game that was made with the Wii U gamepad, with the stylus. And while they did try to make that work with the Switch, it did feel a little more awkward than with the stylus controls on the Wii U. But if they made Mario Maker 3 on the Switch, then the Joy-Con mouse would be perfect for that type of game. Plus, depending on the comfortability factor of the Joy-Con mouse, which I am actually really feeling adjusting to this, by the way, as I'm trying this out, then yeah, I could see myself even possibly using this as my own PC mouse. Cause why not? I mean, having a mouse being used for my PC and that I can connect as a controller seems like a swell combo now, doesn't it? But amongst anything else, Mario Paint on NSO, anyone? But the system, overall, aesthetically, looks pretty similar to the original Switch. And well, I'm not gonna lie, this is kind of giving me some flashbacks to the Wii U, especially when Nintendo first announced that system. Because if you remember with the Wii U, that system looked pretty similar to the Wii. It was bigger and more curved, and it was focusing a bit on the tablet controller, which in hindsight kind of became a predecessor to what the Switch currently is. Now, one of the things I did talk about in my worst case scenario video is that Nintendo might repeat some of the mistakes that they made with the Wii U, because the Wii U was just confusing to consumers. People did not know just what that system even is. Many believe that it was a tablet controller for the original Wii. And, somebody who lived during the Wii U era, I have witnessed this personally. I've seen moms at Target looking at the system, thinking it's a Wii, and not knowing it was an entirely new system. There was a store associate had to explain that to her. And there was also one time where I had somebody over in the apartment that I lived in at the time. And when she looked at the Wii U gamepad, I'm not even kidding, this actually happened. She was looking for the slot to put the game disc in. She thought this was a portable Wii, and that this is the U, and she was like, looking for the slot to put the game disc in. And she's just like, hey, how do you put this in? I'm gonna move this for a minute. How do you put this in? Where does this go? Where's the game slot for this? How does this even function? Ooh, how does this thing even work? So, given the amount of similarities that the system has, then I really do think that calling it the Switch 2 is really the best name that they can give it. And the good news is, the leaks are looking more and more likely that the Switch 2 is actually going to be what it's going to be called. And we have what the logo is going to look like, and some of the leaks that we've seen, like the dock, which has a very nice curved design that I like, then yeah, the system is looking like it's going to be called the Switch 2. And one thing I find actually really surprising is the amount of people online that are against the name. Like, there's some who wished it was called something else, and I'm wondering why that is. Like, what's so bad about Nintendo calling it the Switch 2? Because I mean, it's pretty clear to me at this point that Nintendo is looking to continue with the Switch ecosystem within the next generation system. And it makes sense that they would do that, as the Switch is not only one of the best-selling Nintendo systems, which is soon about to outsell the DS, but it may even be on track of outselling the PlayStation 2. So yeah, it makes sense for Nintendo to continue that momentum with their successor. And really, I'd rather they call it the Switch 2 than for them to call it something else like the new Switch, or the Switch U, or the Switch P. Anything that doesn't mean we get another Wii U situation in terms of brand confusion, especially if the successor is going to look similar to the original. Like, if Sony could get away with numbering their consoles, so can Nintendo. The only thing I maybe don't like about the Switch 2 naming would probably be within the logo. Basically having the 2 being right next to the Switch icon and above the Nintendo Switch text. I feel like it would have been better to have the 2 being next to both the logo and the Nintendo Switch text to further emphasize that this is the Nintendo Switch 2. And I'm sure there is the disappointing factor of expecting the logo and even the design of the system to be a bit more complex than just, well, the number 2 being put next to the logo. But I would chalk that up as the feeling of wonder about a console that we know pretty much nothing about. I mean, like, when we have, like, before any of these leaks even came out, there's always so much mystery and so much surprise about what we wonder what the design is going to be. So much speculation, like, what is it going to look like? Are the joycons gonna look all super advanced and fancy? And then when we actually get to see what it looks like, then we're like, okay, so that's it. Alright, looks pretty similar to the first system. And I think part of what a lot of us expect is a little bit of that wow factor, which is what the original Switch reveal trailer actually brought. But that was a whole different scenario, a whole different situation, because the Switch is an entirely different animal than what the Wii U was before that. So there was so much more of a reason to be surprised by what it's gonna look like. And from the design to having it be a console handheld hybrid, there was just so much wow factor and so much more to be blown away. And I think a lot of us has expected the Switch 2 to have that wow factor. But I think it's a bit hard to really bring that, because unlike the original Switch, which started from scratch, the Switch 2 is really just essentially a more powerful Switch that's riding off the wave of the Switch's success. So while it is maybe a little understandable to expect a little more design-wise, in the end, I think it kind of makes sense and why they would even go in that direction. So now, it is time to get into the real technical stuff about the system, and that is hardware specifications. What is the hardware going to be like, and how powerful is it going to be? And what is it going to mean in terms of third-party support? Because third-party support is important in a system, no matter how much you tell me that you only buy Nintendo systems for Nintendo games. And well, after 2025 began to roll around, which, speaking of which, this is my first video of the new year, so happy belated New Year to all. But after 2025 rolled around, we started getting a look at just what the motherboard looks like. And the chip that it's using is indeed going to be an NVIDIA chipset. Now, keep in mind, these are likely prototype photos, and it may not look like this in the final product. But from what sources have been reporting, the NVIDIA chipset seems to be a variant of the NVIDIA T239 processor. And if that's what it is, that is fantastic news, as I talked about this in my best case scenario, that the rumored NVIDIA T239 is the one that I'm really hoping is in the Switch 2, because that would actually align with the Switch 2's hardware power to be just as powerful, if not more so, as the Xbox Series S. Not the Series X, but the Series S. And that would also make it a little more powerful than the PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, once again, this is a prototype, and this could very well not be the actual Switch 2 chipset. But if we ever do see the official confirmation, particularly from Nintendo themselves, but more likely from reverse engineers that takes apart the full hardware in order to get the hardware specifications, and if this actually confirms that it's the T239 processor, if we actually get official confirmation of that, oh boy, I am going to be outside doing cartwheels and dancing around, because that is the absolute best case scenario that the Switch 2 could include, given the possibilities. And if it is actually that powerful, then that would surely mean that third-party support would not only be more likely to happen, but it could even be potentially be much better third-party support than what the original Switch has gotten. I mean, sure, the original Switch has had good third-party support. It's probably been the best third-party support that a Nintendo system has since the Super Nintendo. But even that was limited by the NVIDIA Tegra X1 chipset from 2015, which puts the hardware at being below the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And given the current state of gaming right now, that chipset is a dinosaur. But with the T239 processor, that puts it at around the power of the Series S. And even though it is still last-gen hardware, it's not so far last-gen that it feels really antiquated, as previous gen is still being supported in some form. That, and the Switch 2, would have the advantage of not having the same bottleneck as the PlayStation 4 Pro, where any game that is being developed for that system also has to be developed for the base PlayStation 4 as well. And also, the leaked specs of the Switch 2 even has it being more powerful than the Steam Deck, which in my opinion is really what the Switch 2's real competition is going to be, as PlayStation and Xbox is kind of a different animal at this point, as that is more purely for home consoles, and while not portable consoles that you take on the go. And the Steam Deck, when that launched, has basically been doing circles around Nintendo. They've been dancing all over them with how much better games like Doom and Doom Eternal run on there, which is probably expected. And there's even been times when emulators on the Steam Deck would run certain Switch games better than the actual Switch itself, where even some of Nintendo's first-party games would run at such embarrassing resolutions and frame rates on their base hardware. Like, I think of Metroid Dread as an example of that. But the Switch 2 is looking to be a bit more powerful if this spec comparison is anything to go by, as the Switch 2 is said to have 1536 CUDA cores, while the Steam Deck, in comparison to that, has 512 cores. The Switch 2 is apparently going to have ray tracing cores, which would also be huge for a portable system, and that's going to have 12 ray tracing cores, while the Steam Deck has 8 ray tracing cores. And the Switch 2 is going to have a Cortex A78C, while the Steam Deck has the AMD Zen 2, and the only thing the Steam Deck really seems to outperform the Switch 2 on, from the looks of it, is the memory aspect, as that would have 16 gigabytes of RAM, while the Switch 2 would have 12 gigabytes of RAM. But still, Switch 2 is shaping up to be one beefy system, and if it really is that beefy, oh man, then I'm excited. Another thing about the Switch 2's hardware that has me really excited, and this is something that has been rumored for years. I think this was even going back to the Switch Pro rumors that was happening, and that is the fact that it's going to be using DLSS technology. Now, I mentioned that in my best case scenario video, and it's pretty much all but confirmed at this point that the Switch 2 is going to have that, as there has been some recent patent leaks that further back this up. DLSS, for those of you who don't know, is short for Deep Learning Super Sampling. It's a type of AI upscaling technology that is developed by NVIDIA, and it's used in their NVIDIA GTX graphics cards. And from the core basics of it, DLSS allows you to upscale gameplay in real time to make it look like it's running in 4K, when really it's being upscaled. So, say for instance, you're playing a game that is locked in 720p, well, NVIDIA's DLSS technology allows you to use its deep learning upscaling technology by filling in the extra pixels while you're playing it, making that 720p look like it's in full 1080p, or even in full 4K, even though it would actually be running the games at a lower resolution, 720p in the case of that particular example. And there's several different versions of NVIDIA's DLSS technology. There's DLSS 2, which is basically super resolution, and that mainly just upscales the image with extra pixels, still making it look sharp and look like it's rendered at higher resolutions, even when the resolution is lower. But DLSS 3, however, has the extra benefit of being able to not only add extra pixels, but it can even add in extra frame rates. So essentially, frame rate interpolation. So that means if there's a game that's locked at 30 frames per second, then DLSS 3 could fill in extra frames to make these games look like they're running at 60 frames per second, even if they're natively being rendered at 30. And this is the type of thing that I'm curious about, particularly when it comes to Switch 1 games. That is, if the Switch 1 games are actually given a full performance boost on the Switch 2, as there's plenty of Switch 1 games I'd like to see at 60 frames per second. Like, I think of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door as a prime recent example of a game that should have been in 60. But I've also seen people online ask for games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom running at 60 FPS. And it's ultimately going to depend on if whichever performance boost the Switch 2 games gives to Switch 1 games actually gives these games the extra boost. But there's still the possibility that even if that happens, they're still locked at 30 frames per second, but the DLSS 3 technology allows it to be interpolated at 60 frames per second. And if it actually works like that, oh boy, that can be potentially huge. But what's even better than that is DLSS 3.5. And if this is the version of DLSS included in the Switch 2, this could be Nintendo's biggest ace up their sleeve. As not only does DLSS 3.5 support upscaling higher resolutions and frame rates, but it also has a feature called ray reconstruction. This allows the DLSS technology to add in extra ray tracing effects for games that is not natively supported on the Switch 2's ray tracing hardware. This is the area where the Switch 2 could actually be able to compete with Microsoft and Sony on the visuals department, and I am really interested in seeing what that's going to look like. Because say for instance, the Switch 2 gets a third-party port of a game released for PlayStation 5 and Series X that utilizes their full ray tracing technology. I want to see how the DLSS 3.5 technology compares in terms of visuals for those two systems. Because if the ray reconstruction technology can actually make these games look just as good, if not better, than they do on current gen systems, then that's a huge game changer. Especially if there are games that really just makes out in the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, where the native hardware and ray tracing starts really becomes taxing on the system to where they have to run at sub 4K at 30 frames per second. But then on the Switch 2, they may just be running at 1080p. But the DLSS 3.5 upscaling technology can make it look like it's running at full 60 frames per second and make it look like it's running in full 4K and adds in ray reconstruction that make these visuals stand out. That's huge, man. That is probably the biggest area where it may not even matter if you were to argue if the Switch 2 is quote-unquote underpowered compared to Microsoft and Sony systems. If the Switch 2's DLSS technology can make these games look this good with less hardware utilization, that can be a huge win, and one that could potentially lead to the Switch 2 being Nintendo's most competitive system, probably since the Super Nintendo. The Switch 1 already has been doing so well, but if the Switch 2 can utilize this, then oh man, that can really make the Switch 2 a very attractive system. But of course, that depends on if the Switch 2 actually uses DLSS 3.5. Because we don't know for sure what version of NVIDIA's DLSS technology the Switch 2 is actually going to use. It could be the DLSS 3 technology, which would still be good, but it would also mean that the ray tracing enhancement that I was talking about earlier would not be there. Now, all of this does sound amazing in theory, but I want to see how this actually works in practice, and how it actually works, because although this technology sounds amazing, it does have potential for setbacks. Because it does, after all, use AI technology, and AI, when it comes to image processing, can be known for producing just sometimes rather iffy results. With frame interpolation, there's a chance you might see a bit of ghosting, or with AI upscaling, there might be some moments where you get a little bit of inaccuracy as to how the image is upscaled. So it is possible that we see DLSS 3.5 in the Switch 2, but the results may not be as desirable as what I explained. Only time will tell. Now, of course, the leaks are still coming even as I make this video, so there may be some that I missed, and there's even certain information that we know so very little about. An example of that is the operating system. The only thing we really saw come out of it that has gained quite a bit of traction is from a Reddit user that described what it looks like. Basically saying it's reminiscent to the Wii U's menu, and that it will have background animations and music. Now, I think the reason why that post may have gained as much traction as it has is because he mentioned something about there being a pointer, and that post was made just 2 days before the Joy-Con mouse started to leak, implying that this may refer to the Joy-Con mouse leak. I don't know, and also, this is, at the end of the day, from a Reddit post, so I take leaks like that with an extreme, minuscule grain of salt. There's also listings on GameStop that show some SanDisk Express microSD cards that's being made for the Switch 2. Now, for those of you who don't know what SanDisk Express is, they are microSD cards with SSD speeds, which is really something that is needed for gaming, and definitely something that is needed for the Switch 2, especially if the rumors of it running the T239 processor is true. Okay, So we got leaks for what the console looks like. Some of the accessories, the mouse function, the chipset, the technology, confirmation of backwards compatibility. But what about the games? Well, while we don't have a ton of info about that, probably the most substantial leak of that is from Fnac. That is a French retailer, and that has been leaking out a whole inventory that shows placeholder names from different developers. And from what it appears, there's going to be games from Square Enix, EA, Bandai Namco, Bethesda, Take-Two, and Warner Brothers, which is a pretty decent set of third-party developers. Now, I'm guessing Square Enix, one of the games that's going to come out from that, is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is one of the games that's rumored to come out for the Switch 2. And as far as Bethesda goes, my first guess would maybe be Doom: The Dark Ages, given Doom's history on the Switch, with Doom and Doom Eternal being released on there. It was also mentioned by Nate the Hate in his podcast, who is also a pretty reliable leaker, that the Switch 2 is going to have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Halo the Master Chief Collection. I mean, Halo on a Nintendo system, that is going to be crazy if it's true, but it has been rumored for years that Halo is going to go multi-platform, and given Microsoft's recent history of publishing games to other platforms, this may not be too far off. And for that is all of the leaks I have to outline. There may be some that I missed, and even some that came out right after filming this video. But the bottom line is, Nintendo, please reveal the Switch 2 already. It's time, the leaks are getting out of hand. We know basically what the system is, just announce the damn console already. But let's see if that January 17th reveal date actually does end up being true. I mean, best we can do now is to just sit back and wait and see what happens. But now, what do you guys think? Are you looking forward to the Switch 2? And do you think the leaks outlined in this video are accurate? Let me know in the comments below, and subscribe to DSL Media for more content. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.